Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Odyssey Recaps Below the Surface Edition. Today we are looking at book or chapter 19, titled by Emily Wilson as The Queen and the Beggar, in which Penelope questions the disguised Odysseus in the hopes of obtaining more information about her missing husband, while Odysseus is trying to test her loyalty and gather more information on her state of mind and plans for the suitors. This is a heavily layered chapter with levels of meaning and understanding that can be kind of hard to tease apart. In a way, this chapter feels like the audience is being invited into the complex trap that Odysseus is weaving, as we're the only ones aside from him and Athena that are fully aware of what is going on in this scene. To help keep everything straight, I've identified four main layers of meaning. The first layer is simple, what is actually happening on surface level, which is Penelope interviewing Odysseus, who is disguised as a poor beggar from Crete. The second layer is Odysseus using his false Cretan identity to test Penelope and gather information. The third layer is the fake backstory Odysseus has given himself as fallen Cretan royalty that he is using as part of the test. The fourth and final layer is what we learn about Odysseus' real backstory and family history that is exposed when an elderly slave washes his feet and finds an identifying scar. This conversation between the disguised Odysseus and Queen Penelope feels a little like watching a verbal chess match. They both want information from the other, but they both also have things that they either are hiding or that they think the other may be hiding. They also don't fully trust each other or the information they are receiving. And though the suitors and Telemachus have gone to bed by the time Penelope and the disguised Odysseus had their conversation, they aren't alone. They're surrounded by slaves, some of whom may be loyal to them, and some who may be loyal to the suitors. They have to speak carefully, and to complicate matters even more, a god is watching them, Athena, who is invisible to all but Odysseus, although even he can't see everything that she's doing. So, a very complex and layered chapter indeed. Let's dive in. The chapter opens with Odysseus and Athena in the hall of the palace late at night after the suitors have all gone home. Well, not home, but to where they're staying outside of the castle. They're plotting how to best murder the suitors and retake the palace. Odysseus speaks to Telemachus, who enters the room but cannot see Athena. He is the only one who knows that the beggar is really his father in disguise. Odysseus tells him to go and gather all the weapons in the house and lock them away somewhere to hide them so that the suitors cannot use them to defend themselves. He tells his son that when the suitors ask where the weapons have gone, to just tell them that he's protecting them from smoke damage from the fireplaces, and also that a spirit warned him to put away weapons when men are drinking, as weapons themselves can tempt a man to fight, and a senseless murder over a drunken disagreement would bring dishonor to the palace. Telemachus obeys his father and summons his old nanny, an elderly slave woman named Eurycleia, and advises her to lock the rest of the slave women in their rooms while he hides the weapons. Sorry. In previous chapters, Odysseus and Telemachus have discussed the uncertainty around the slave women's loyalties, and we have seen examples of some slaves choosing to turn against their masters. So this is a likely reason for locking them away, but it's worth noting that we're starting this chapter with a general suspicion of women and their loyalties, setting the tone for the conversation Odysseus is about to have with his wife. Suspicion, loyalty, obedience, deception, and confinement are all themes that echo throughout this chapter and in many ways throughout the poem itself. Odysseus, Telemachus, and Eurycleia hide the weapons, while Athena watches on, seen only by Odysseus, though Telemachus suspects that there is a god present. When they're done, Odysseus tells his son to go to bed, though he will stay to aggravate the slave girls and your mother and make her cry and let her question me. Telemachus leaves her bed and Odysseus is alone in the hall, plotting with Athena. His words to Telemachus were an interesting way to phrase his intentions. He's lumping his wife, the queen, in with the slave girls. The loyalty of all of them is under suspicion, and they all need to be aggravated and tested, even if this causes his wife more pain. It's also important to consider that Odysseus has been told by many characters, some divine, that Penelope has remained loyal to him throughout his 20-year absence, and yet he still believes he must cause her pain to find out for himself. Penelope also gets to question him, but with him in disguise as a beggar, it's not an honest exchange of information or history. But of course, Penelope is expecting lies, having been lied to by fortune tellers and false prophets for many years. Penelope enters the room with her wits about her, looking like a goddess, specifically two goddesses: Artemis, the goddess of, among other things, the hunt and chastity, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love. However, a goddess who was unfaithful to her husband, a story we have heard only a few chapters earlier. Chastity and adultery, hunter and lover. Penelope could be any one of these. But she isn't the only one being interrogated. She has her wits about her. And throughout this chapter, both she and Odysseus are described as being cunning, clever, and agile of mind. Odysseus may be a legendary hero, but Penelope herself is a legendary queen. The slave women begin to prepare a comfortable seating area for their chat, when one of them, Melantho, the one who previously insulted the disguised Odysseus and is sleeping with at least one of the suitors, begins again to insult him and accuse him of spying on the women, demanding he leave the house at once. Odysseus begins to scold and threaten her, warning her that there are consequences to actions, and that her queen, Telemachus, or Odysseus himself, if he ever returns, may punish her for her actions. Penelope cuts in, also scolding and to threaten the slave, calling Melantho a brazen, shameless dog, and saying she knew that Penelope had asked the beggar to remain so that she may question him. Scolding over, the slaves finish setting up the chairs. Penelope and the disguised Odysseus take their seats, and the game begins. This is the first conversation Penelope and Odysseus have had in over 20 years, and again we have yet another important moment that feels passed over. And yet, for Penelope, this isn't really an important moment. It's simply yet another interview with someone who claims to have knowledge of her husband, something that she's been through many times before. The first thing she asks the beggar is where he comes from. Odysseus starts off with flattery and compliments, comparing Penelope to a virtuous and godlike king, an interesting comparison that deviates from the usual comparisons to goddesses or divine feminine beings. The hypothetical king that he compares her to is one who cares for his people and brings forth nourishment from the ground, helping her people thrive. Perhaps a buried compliment for how well Penelope has cared for Ithaca in his absence, carrying out all the duties of both a king and a queen while she waits for her son to grow or her husband to return. He tells her, "This is your house. You have the right to question me, but do not ask about my family or my native land. The memory will fill my heart with pain. I am a man of sorrow." Calling it her house is another interesting point, because up until now, the house has been referred to as belonging to the great Odysseus. And we've also been told that when Penelope marries, she must leave the house and go live with her new husband. But in this moment, he says it's hers. A real acknowledgement of the difficult role she's fulfilled in his absence, or is this a tactical flattery to disarm her? And then there's the man of sorrow part. Penelope says frequently that she's filled with sorrow and grief and tears. Is Odysseus trying to endear himself to her to make them both seem grief-filled and thus on the same side? Or is this real? He has said over and over that he is filled with grief and sorrow. There is, of course, also the possibility that it is both. He's using the truth to bolster his lie, something he does frequently, as a good liar would. But regardless, Odysseus carries on and says it's rude to keep grieving, and that is why he won't speak about his own sad history. Penelope says she understands grief and suffering, as she has been ruined by the gods the day they took her husband away from her, and now she is besieged by suitors from all over, courting her against her will and spoiling her home. She can't deal with them. She says, "I miss Odysseus. My heart is melting. The suitors want to push me into marriage, but I spin schemes." She tells him of her trick with the burial shroud, where by day I wove the web, and in the night by torchlight I unwove it. Now, weaving is an incredibly common activity for women in the Odyssey. Goddesses, queens, princesses, serving women all weave. So this is not unusual, but as always, there's another layer here. Weaving is heavily associated with Athena, but the other thing that is frequently woven in the Odyssey is fate. The Moirai, or the Fates, are beings who spin or weave the fates of mortals, and sometimes immortal, lives. They control the fabric of life through weaving it. In a way, Penelope weaving and then unweaving the same shroud is her making and unmaking and delaying fate, a truly astounding feat. And there's one more layer of meaning to tease out here. Another thing heavily associated with weaving in this text are stories and lies. Odysseus metaphorically spins and weaves lives and tales, and here we have Penelope literally using spinning and weaving to create and bolster a lie, a fascinating twinning. Penelope goes on and tells Odysseus that her trick worked for 3 years, but that on the 4th year she was betrayed by her dog-like slave girls, who told the suitors what she was doing and helped them catch her in the act. The suitors then stood around her, shouting while they made her finish it in front of them. Imagine how terrifying that would have been. Betrayal, albeit by enslaved individuals who, in my opinion, have every right to try and earn their freedom by whatever means they can, but still, betrayal by those she relies on, then a horde of 118 angry, armed, and likely drunken men surrounding her and screaming at her. She is protected only by the invisible and ever-changing social contracts and laws of propriety, along with her name and reputation, all things that don't hold up very well against the point of a spear. Somehow, she has managed to hold out beyond that terrible night, but now she says she can hold off no longer. She is besieged on all sides, not just by the suitors, but also by her parents and her own son, who is now a man and knows that his wealth is being wasted by the suitors. She has no more allies and no more tricks left. She must marry. And then, after revealing her own pain and history, she asks the beggar again for his story. Odysseus, the master of deception, answers her, telling her he wishes she would stop asking, but though it will pain him greatly, he will tell her his own sad story. And then he launches into yet another iteration of his Cretan lie. This time, he is the grandson of the famed Cretan king Minos. His name is Ethan, and he met Odysseus in Crete, where he had been blown off course on his way to the Trojan War, and they became guest friends. The text says, "His lies were like the truth, and as she listened, she began to weep. Her face was melting." It goes on to compare her tears to snow melting in spring and turning once again into flowing rivers, a renewal this time instead of a loss. And his lies were indeed mixed with truth. With Odysseus, the lord of lies and master of deception, it's not always easy to separate truth from fiction. This particular stanza, lines 204 to 216, if you want to look it up in the book, is a fascinating sharing of sorrow. It says, "She wept for her own husband, who was right next to her, and Odysseus," it says, "pities his grieving wife inside his heart, but kept his eyes quite still, without a flicker, like horn or iron, and he hid his tears with artifice. She is melting snow, he is iron, but he's also horn." A little later in this chapter, in lines 565 to 569, Penelope talks about two gates from whence dreams come. One is made of ivory and one of horn. The gate of ivory produces trickery and falsehood, and dreams from the gate of horn are true. So to say that Odysseus resembles horn, even as he hid his tears with artifice, is a fascinating juxtaposition. Layers of meaning, layers of truth fill every line of this chapter, burying Odysseus' true feelings and intentions beneath them. Penelope cries for a while longer, but then she gathers herself and tells the beggar that she's going to test him. All the while, of course, he is secretly testing her. Her test is far more straightforward than his. She asks him to describe her husband, his men, and what clothes he was wearing when they met. Odysseus does so, telling her in careful detail about the purple cloak and intricately carved golden brooch he was wearing, and also describes a herald he had, a man with black skin, curly hair, and round shoulders, who was his favorite out of all his crew because his mind matched his own. And just a quick side note, this is yet another reminder that if anyone tries to tell you people of color don't belong in adaptations of the Odyssey, they are deeply incorrect and need to re-examine both the text and their own biases. Penelope begins to sob and weep again, and the poem says, "These words increased her grief. She knew the signs that he had planted as evidence." She tells the beggar that she had given these clothes to her husband before he left, and now she knows that she'll never get to welcome him home. A curse sailed on that ship when he set off to see Ilium, the town I will not name. But the disguised Odysseus tells her to stop ruining her pretty skin with tears and grieving for her husband, because her beloved godlike husband is coming home. He is certain of it. Odysseus, he says, is alive and near. Again, mixing truth and lies, telling her that although Odysseus lost his fleet of ships and men when they were drowned for disturbing the cattle of the sun god, he has gained a heap of treasure through hustling, and the Phaeacians have helped him on his journey home. He says of Odysseus, "He would have been here long ago, but he decided he should travel more and gather greater wealth. No man on earth knows better how to make a profit." He tells Penelope that he has seen the treasure for himself, and that it is enough to feed his children and grandchildren for 10 whole generations. This may seem like an unusual thing to focus on in this moment, but he's telling her that Odysseus has been thinking about his family and planning for their extended future. He won't come home empty-handed with nothing to show for the 20 years of absence. he can still care for his family. He can still protect her, not just with a sword, but with treasure to secure their future and the future of their descendants. He tells her that Odysseus has only one more stop to make, to visit a sacred oak tree to ask if Zeus advises him to go home openly or in disguise, but that he is safe and near at hand, and that he swears by Zeus and by the hearth that shelters him now that Odysseus will be home. This very lunar month between the waning and the waxing moon, Odysseus will come. This is a fascinating moment of truth, a moment where, if Penelope is quick enough, she might catch on. He is giving her a clue. He might be closer than she thinks, and possibly in disguise. Now, there is some debate among scholars here as to when exactly Penelope knows that her husband has returned, and I'm happy to dive a bit deeper into that. If anyone wants to hear more, just let me know in the comments. But for now, let's just assume that Penelope doesn't know, that she hasn't caught on, but the seed has been planted, and Odysseus has given her a hint. Could this mean that he's finally beginning to trust her? Penelope, having heard many predictions and prophecies about her husband's imminent return, is wary and tells him that if he's right, she will reward him greatly for this information, but that for now, she does not believe that Odysseus will ever return. The conversation over, Penelope orders the slaves to wash the beggar's feet and set him up a clean bed with fresh sheets and blankets, then in the morning to bathe and oil him and seat him beside Telemachus in the hall and let him eat with him. She says that none of the suitors are allowed to harm him, however much they may rage. But Odysseus isn't done. He tells Penelope that he doesn't want clean sheets or a soft bed. He doesn't sleep well and prefers to lie on some rough pallet and wait for dawn. He says he doesn't want the slave women to wash his feet unless there's an elderly one who he can trust who has endured the same heartbreak and sorrow that he has. Penelope is thoughtful and tells him she's never had a visitor so well-spoken and scrupulous as he. She says she does have an elderly and trustworthy slave, one who raised Odysseus from birth. She is weak and elderly now, but she can wash his feet. She calls over to Eurycleia and tells her to wash the stranger's feet. Eurycleia cries for Odysseus, wondering who washes his feet, if perhaps it is bad slaves who are mocking him and being cruel to him, like the ones who sleep with the suitors. But she says she will wash his feet, though reluctantly, as she has never seen someone who looks and sounds so much like her missing master. Odysseus tells her that everyone who ever saw him and Odysseus together has said that they are very much alike and that she is perceptive to have caught it. Now, keep in mind that Athena has magically disguised him, but that she can choose to what extent he is disguised and from whom. Has Odysseus specifically requested this slave as a way to reveal himself to her? Has he deemed her trustworthy or necessary and wishes to bring her in on his plans? Regardless of his intentions, Eurycleia begins to wash his feet, and Odysseus positions himself facing into the darkness because he has a premonition in his heart that when she touched him, she would feel his scar and all would be revealed. Which seems to imply that even Odysseus doesn't know to what extent Athena has disguised him, and it's possible that Athena revealing the scar to the woman is Athena approving of her being brought in on the secret. Eurycleia does feel the scar, and she knows instantly who he is. The poem now veers into a brief recount of how a young Odysseus received the scar. He was visiting his grandfather, Autolycus, who the text says was the best of all mankind at telling lies and stealing, a gift given to him as a reward for his piety by Hermes, the god of thieves. It was this grandfather who named Odysseus, telling his daughter, Odysseus' mother, "Name him this. I am disliked by many, all across the world, and I dislike them back. So name the child Odysseus, and when he is a man, let him come," and tells her to send Odysseus to him when he's a man, and he will give his grandson much treasure. In her introduction, Emily Wilson tells us the name Autolycus could mean real wolf, and that the name Odysseus is very similar to the verb odusomai, meaning to be angry at, to dislike, or to hate, and notes that Odysseus in many ways takes after his grandfather, as he is arguably widely hated by gods and other mortals, and that like his grandfather, he lies, steals, and deceives. Odysseus was visiting this grandfather when his cousins took him out to hunt, and while they're on the hunt on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, Odysseus disturbed a giant and deadly boar in its lair. It surged out and gored a giant chunk of flesh from his leg, but despite the pain and fear, the young Odysseus managed to slew the deadly beast with a spear all by himself, an astonishing feat. He was bandaged up and sent home with the promised treasure and also a very distinctive scar. The slave, Eurycleia, who raised Odysseus from birth, recognizes the scar immediately, and in her shock, she upturns the basin of water that she's washing him with, as both joy and grief took hold of her, and tears filled her eyes. She reaches up to touch his beard and says, "You are Odysseus, my darling child, my master." She glances towards Penelope to tell her that her husband has finally come home, but Athena has magically clouded Penelope's mind, and she doesn't notice. Odysseus then grabs his elderly nanny by the throat and asks her if she's trying to destroy him. He says that God has revealed his identity to her, but she must stay silent and tell no one. If she reveals his secret to anyone at all, he will kill her along with the suitors and other slave women. Despite this shockingly violent and abhorrent treatment of Eurycleia, she reassures him that she will remain as strong as stone or iron, and that after he has defeated the suitors, she will tell him which of the slave women dishonor him and which are free from guilt. Odysseus tells her that he doesn't need her help, and he will decide who is guilty and who is innocent on his own. Eurycleia leaves and gets more water and silently finishes washing and oiling his feet before very carefully recovering the scar in rags. Freed from Athena's distractions, Penelope speaks to Odysseus again, openly telling him of her pain. She says, "I have been afflicted by some god with pain beyond all measure," and says that she tried to concentrate on her work during the day, but despite the constant grief. But then when night comes and everybody goes to sleep, I lie crying in bed and overwhelmed by pain. Worries and sorrow crowd into my heart. She then asks for his advice, saying that her mind is pulled in two directions. Should she stay here beside her son and help keep the palace running? My property, my slave girls, and my great house in order to show respect towards my husband's bed and what people say? Or, she asks him, should she marry one of the suitors and leave Ithaca with him? When Telemachus was young, she couldn't leave. He needed her. But now her son is all grown up, and she says he urges her to go, worried about the suitors eating his inheritance and his property. Penelope tells Odysseus about an odd dream she had, one where she was watching a herd of 20 geese who were eating her grain. But then a huge eagle comes and breaks their necks and kills them all. In the dream, she wailed for her lost geese, but then the eagle comes back and sat on top of the roof and spoke to her, telling her to cheer up, that this is a vision that will come true, that the geese are the suitors, and the eagle is her husband who has come home to give the suitors a cruel end. The disguised Odysseus responds and tells her that the dream is true, that Odysseus himself said how he will fulfill it. It means ruin for all the suitors. No one can protect them from death. But Penelope doesn't believe him. It's here that she talks about the two gates from whence dreams come, one made of ivory that produces lies, and one of horn that produces truth. She says that she thinks this dream is a lie, though she wishes, like her son, that it were true. The approaching day of doom, she says, is not for the suitors, but for her, the day that she will be taken from the house of Odysseus. She said she has decided to arrange a contest for the suitors. Before he left for Troy, Odysseus used to set up 12 axes in a row, and then he would string a giant bow and shoot an arrow through all 12 axes in a single shot. She says that whichever of the suitors can repeat this same astounding feat will win her hand in marriage, and she will leave her lovely home, her marriage home, so full of wealth and life, and go away with him, though she says she'll remember this home in dreams forever. Now, again, this is heavily debated, but if Penelope did suspect that the beggar in disguise is actually her husband, asking him to approve of this contest, a contest that relies on a uniquely difficult feat that her husband excels at, would be an excellent test. This is such an interesting moment to me because we, the reader, are in the same position as Odysseus. We can't know her thoughts. We don't know if she suspects or doesn't suspect. All we can go on are her words. Her mind is hidden to us all. Regardless, the disguised Odysseus is pleased with her suggestion and tells her to arrange the contest immediately. He says the suitors will fumble with the bow and will not finish stringing it or shooting the arrow through before Odysseus, the mastermind, arrives. Penelope chooses her words carefully and says, "If you would sit and entertain me, guest, I would never wish to go to sleep, but humans cannot stay awake forever." She tells him she will go upstairs to her bed of grief, heavily stained with tears. She says, "I will lie there, and you lie in this house," telling him to spread blankets on the floor or ask the slaves to make up a bed for him. And on that enigmatic note, she leaves and goes upstairs to cry again for her husband until Athena sends her to sleep. A complex and interesting chapter indeed. And it's not going to slow down. It's only going to get more complex and interesting from here on out. So please join me next time for book 20. See you guys there.